strikes down this regulatory agency, the CFPB, just because they want to go along with, what the banksters want, they're going to devastate, throw into total chaos our financial system here in the United States. So that's the first case. That's absolutely huge. Then there's Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo, which could overturn the Chevron deference. The Chevron deference says that it's okay for Congress to say to a federal regulatory agency, say the Environmental Protection Agency, we, Congress, are telling you to clean up the air. And then the EPA goes out and hires a bunch of scientists and says, okay, where's the air dirty? What dirty air do we need to attend to? How do we go ahead and clean it up? And then they come up with a plan and, good science, and then they execute that plan. Well, what's happened here is you've got Republicans who have sued saying, no, wait a minute, that Chevron deference that the federal government can defer to the expertise of regulatory agencies is wrong. That if Congress wants to have the CO2 limits changed or the soot particulate levels in the air changed, they have to pass a law that specifically says that, rather than just giving the authority to the EPA, in this example, to come up with what the standards should be. In other words, instead of the EPA hiring scientists, individual members of Congress need to be hiring scientists. Instead of the EPA doing the research, Congress needs to do the research, which of course you and I both know is never going to happen. Congress doesn't have the time, the manpower, the wherewithal to do this kind of thing, which is why we have it done by regulatory agencies. But that's exactly why the right-wing billionaires are bringing this lawsuit to try to shut down these regulatory agencies and say, no, Congress has to pass detailed legislation telling you exactly what they're going to do, and with its own scientists, because they know it'll never happen. It's a way of destroying the regulatory state. What Steve Bannon said, the number one goal of the Trump administration was to deconstruct the regulatory state. So that's the second case. That's Loper Bright Enterprises v. Raimondo. Then you got Alexander v. South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP. This is a case where a three-judge panel in January said that this district in South Carolina, this gerrymander, is unconstitutional under the rules of South Carolina and under the federal Constitution. In fact, they said that it was, quote, an unconstitutional racial gerrymander because the legislators had deliberately moved tens of thousands of black voters to a different district, making a district a safe seat for Republicans. There's another case around the Second Amendment. This is United States versus Rahimi. It's a challenge, which this is totally bizarre. The Republicans who brought this challenge to the Supreme Court are saying that it is unconstitutional for any government, state or federal government, to say that a man who has assaulted his wife and threatens his wife may not own a gun. They are saying that no, if a spouse is abusive, if a spouse has been violent, that spouse has an absolute right under the Second Amendment to own a gun and use that gun to kill his wife. The last part of that they don't include, but that's where it's going to go. So that's U.S. versus Rahimi. And their rationale for this, by the way, is that because in 1789, when the Constitution was ratified, there was no such thing as a restraining order for domestic abuse, that men who are under restraining orders by their wives, or wives of their husbands for that matter, although it's far more rare, cannot be subject to restraining orders because they didn't exist in 1789. This is the logical consequence of the insanity that Antonin Scalia brought us with the Heller decision. And then, there's the abortion case. This is the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the FDA challenging mifepristone. Now, the Supreme Court has not said for sure that they're going to take this case. And if they don't, then the availability of mifepristone across the country has been severely limited. And then, of course, there is a big tax case, Moore v. U.S., that could eliminate the ability of the federal government to charge taxes, income taxes, on foreign money. that has not been realized in the United States. So lots and lots of stuff here. Clarence Thomas, this, has recused himself from one case, but none of these ones that have to do with finance and billionaires. And they're calling, Common Cause and other groups, are calling for Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from these cases that involve his billionaire donors. And he's saying, I ain't going to do that. These guys paid for me fair and square. And I'm not going to, go back on my deal with Harlan Crow and Paul Singer and these other guys, or at least it appears that that's essentially what Clarence Thomas is trying to say. He hasn't obviously used those exact words. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, when their state Supreme Court struck down the Republican gerrymandered maps, everybody thought, oh, cool, now North Carolina is going to end up, having a legislature and a congressional delegation that actually reflects the will of the people of North Carolina. But then they had an election, and the Republicans took control of their Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court just reversed itself and said, oh, no, not only is gerrymandering fine, you can gerrymander even more severely than you have up to this point, which the Republicans in North Carolina are doing right now, which brought Eric Willoughby, a senior in high school in North Mecklenburg County, Huntersville, in North Carolina, brought him before the state legislature. And this is what he had to say. And I thought this is absolutely brilliant. This is how a lot of Zoomers are feeling right now. He said, I'm 17. I should be spending my Wednesday afternoons with friends or family, but instead I'm here with y'all. I'm here because every single day I have to worry about which liberties Republican legislators are going to choose to gut next. They started by refusing to take action against gun violence and destroyed your right to peace of mind about something as simple as sending your child to school. Then they came for your right to make the most basic reproductive health care decisions that were right for your family and you. This time they're coming for every North Carolinian's right to fair representation. Eric Willoughby goes on to say, 17-year-old Eric Willoughby, this legislature is made up of the same people who have drawn maps that intentionally disenfranchise and limit the power of historically marginalized and minority voters. These are the same people who have proven to us time and time and again, through their voting records that they don't care. If these people cannot be trusted to protect our basic rights, how can we trust them to draw fair and impartial maps that promote a healthy and vibrant democracy? They can't. We can't trust them. The Republicans in this committee and the others in the House and Senate don't care about democracy. They don't care about fair maps. All they care about are three simple things: re-election, power, and dollar signs. This redistricting stunt is a clear power grab by Republicans in the General Assembly, so I urge you now, watch your step. Be very careful in what you choose to do, because young people like me are watching, and young people like me are fed up. Oh, very interesting. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and Hartmann Report.
We say fight back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing, in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP, because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family gets scammed. That's a half.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Tuesday. A lot going on in the world today. Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, was just speaking at the United Nations, asking the countries of the world to come together. Good luck with that. We've got a lot to talk about today. How Donald Trump's MAGA Republican Party actually increases the risk of World War III. Seriously? Also, is the FCC preparing to take down Fox? This could get interesting. And Putin's best buddy, Trump, is planning on pulling America out of NATO in his second term as president. Oh, what could possibly go wrong? At the top of the second hour of the program, Nina Turner, our old buddy from Ohio, is going to drop by. She's starting a new national workers organization. I'll tell you about that. She's already developed an alliance with one of the Amazon unions. Also, expose the dangers of viewing ADHD as a disorder in our second hour. In the third hour of our program, Greg Palast is going to drop by. Killers of the Flower Moon. Have you seen the movie? Louise and I saw it on Sunday. It's 3.5 hours. It's quite an amazing movie. It's not the bloody, gory thing I was expecting. It's really thoughtful and well, we'll talk with Greg about that in the third hour of the program. Also, Geeky Science. Does a blood transfusion pass on the donor's personality too? Really? But, that's, and also with regard to our telephones, yesterday we were having problems with our phones. We had an engineer in here all yesterday afternoon, and now it appears that Mark, our call screener, can't, his computer's not connected to the call screen software, so we can't answer the phones for the moment, but we'll get that fixed here shortly. He's on the phone with Chase, our engineer, right now, and, hopefully we'll get that all resolved, and our phones will be working today. Knock wood. All right. So my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled "How Trump's MAGA GOP Increases the Risk of World War III." And, I mentioned this briefly yesterday, that there are basically two groups that are working really, really hard to devastate the United States government, or, what you and I think of as the United States government. One is the group of right-wing billionaires who think that the government is doing a whole bunch of things that it shouldn't be doing, that there's absolutely no reason for, in fact, it's counterproductive to have programs like welfare programs, women and infants, children program, providing health care, food stamps, providing food to people, Section 9 housing, subsidized housing. All of these things in the minds of these right-wing billionaires, hey, I became a billionaire, you can too. All of those things are things in their minds that actually cause people to become lazy. Now, the science suggests that that's a crock, that there's no truth to that at all, or very little truth to that. If getting free stuff caused people to be lazy, then we should outlaw, any inheritance by the children of rich people, because, hey, you're going to turn their children into lazy people. Who wants, that would be a terrible thing to do, right? The inheritance tax should be set at 100% if we're really concerned that giving people free stuff makes them lazy. I mean, the Koch brothers inherited an oil company from daddy, right? George W. Bush inherited, a fortune from his father and grandfather. I mean, did it make them lazy? I don't think so. So anyway, that's a starting point. Number one, you've got a group of right-wing billionaires who are trying to tear down our country, or at least tear down what we think of as our country, all the protective functions, all the things that our country does. And then on top of that, you've got Putin and Xi and MBS in Saudi Arabia. You got a bunch of and Hamas now. You've got a bunch of groups or organizations or whatever you want to call it who are very interested in tearing down the United States, in just, not having us be an influence internationally, and for that matter, having us be in complete disarray domestically. Russia is particularly interested in this, which is why they worked so hard to get Donald Trump elected president in 2016, why they tried to get him reelected in 2020, and while they're still pushing his candidacy. among, other countries. You've got Chinese trolls as well as Russian trolls. I mean, this is, right across the board. So now you've got 11 Democrats on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party who sent letters to the Director of National Intelligence and the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency asking for a briefing on how the Chinese government is manipulating Republicans amidst the speaker debate to keep America enfeebled in anticipation of a possible invasion of Taiwan. This is what their letter said, quote, "Our foreign adversaries are leveraging current political dysfunction in the U.S. House of Representatives to discredit democracy globally in their efforts to promote an alternative authoritarian model of governance internationally, enhance their ability to form economic and national security alliances, and harm our standing with strategic partners." So, the Democrats have figured out that the Republicans are being manipulated by the Chinese communists. I got to say, as an old hippie peacenik freak, it pains me to say it, but America, Europe, and the democracies of Asia are all preparing for World War. And we should probably have a conversation about this. I mean, one of the factors giving it a push is the way the Republican Party has basically kneecapped America in this Trump-Putin era, amplified by the successes that Russia and China are having with the help of, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and the Murdoch family in social media and television media, in basically eroding American and overall Western unity around what used to be a shared belief in democracy. This period from World War II until today has often been referred to as the long peace. I mean, yeah, there were wars, but they weren't world wars. The Vietnam War wasn't a world war, Afghanistan, Iraq. And that peace, that period of peace from 1945 until today, more or less, is generally believed to have stood because the United States was militarily so strong, that we defeated Germany and Japan in World War II and Spain and Italy. And, we were and we defeated the Soviet Union in 1991. And, the Soviet Union ended, and now it's just Russia. So, we still have this kind of military power, but how do world wars start? World War I was a series of local crises that, like dominoes falling, just or matches igniting other matches. Each one lit the next one until, and until countries started invoking mutual defense treaties and then, started interacting, fighting each other. So that was how World War I played out. World War II, on the other hand, came about because an anti-democratic bully, an axis of fascist strongmen, that was in Europe, it was Germany, Italy, and Spain. And in Asia, of course, it was Japan. That they decided the world's honeymoon with democracies was over, was long over. And that being weaker than tough guy autocracies, we wouldn't have the stomach. That they thought that we were weaker. And so they figured we wouldn't take on the bullies. And at first, it looked that way. I mean, the Germans had incredible successes between 1938 and 1941 until two things happened. One was, Japan bombed us at Pearl Harbor, and that got us into the war with Japan, which immediately got us into the war with Germany. And, at the same time, you had this just, all-out war going on all across Europe that was, as the world became aware of it, it killed 28 million people. Excuse me, that was World War I. World War II killed 50 to 80 million people. So if World War III is to happen in the future, it would almost certainly be a combination of the two. In other words, local crises spiraling to the point where, you have major powers interacting with each other. So there's three different scenarios for this. The first is World War III begins in the Middle East. The second is World War III begins in Europe, and the third is World War III begins in Asia. And, you know, I realize it's grim talking about this stuff, but I think it's an important conversation to have. How might these things happen? And by the way, I'm assuming that World War III is not going to be, you know, an end of days scenario. That, oh, it looks like our phones are working now. I see that that Mark is talking to somebody on the phone, so that's a good sign. Our phones are working. First off, if it started in the Middle East, this would be, you know, there's a broad consensus in the region that the main goal of Hamas in the Middle East, in the, you know, with this savage attack on Israel, was to provoke Israel into overreacting. That the reason that they were doing this was that they wanted Israel to you know, have a bad name and a bloody nose, and that out of that, they would then be able to blow up the peace talks that were going on between Israel and Saudi Arabia. They did not. Hamas was like, you know, the last man standing. Hamas is a Sunni organization, and you know, the Gulf states, Oman, Jordan, well, the big ones, Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar, they're all Sunni states. Iran is the big Shia state in the region. Hezbollah is Shia, but Hamas is Sunni. So Hamas was looking at losing all of their influence, basically, you know, all of their support. If Saudi Arabia, which had been supporting Hamas, if Qatar, which had been supporting Hamas, in fact, the leadership of Hamas lives in Qatar. These multi-billionaires with their Bentleys and Rolls Royces and fancy apartments, they live in Qatar. And so, you know, if the countries in that region, if Qatar and Saudi Arabia and others, if they were to cut deals with I'm going to try and put some of these calls on hold here. I don't know what happened to Mark, but if they were to cut deals in the region, it would be leaving Hamas out. Hamas would be, you know, it'd be kind of the end of Hamas. And so, you know, they didn't want that to happen, and so and I think they succeeded. I think Hamas succeeded in their goal of blowing up the peace talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now they may have more on their hands than they want, but now China is sending a fleet into, you know, aircraft carriers and destroyers into the region. We are, and Russia already has them in the region.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
That is a World War I scenario. That's the Middle East. We'll talk about the Pacific and Europe in just a moment. And welcome back. Denise in Folsom, California. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So I am calling. I got a really interesting question I want to ask you. And what it is talking to a neighbor. I have a lot of Republicans in our neighborhood that we just really enjoy. Mm-hmm. This neighbor is a true right-winger, believes in Trump and everything he says. But he wants to change his party to independent now. Mm-hmm. And I didn't ask him why he wanted to do that. But then when I was talking to some other neighbors who have Republicans in their family, they said, oh, yeah, my family member now is an independent, too. So my question to you, Tom, is why? Why are they doing?
Well, there's two things going on. One is that increasingly people don't want to be associated with the GOP. I mean, the GOP has lost, you know, I think they had something like 31% of the American electorate were signed up as Republicans, and now it's down to something like 26 or 27% over the last 7 years. You know, I think it's people just don't want to be associated with Trump. The other is that, that's probably the main reason, actually. Now that I think about it.
Tom, how do you have a conversation with someone who believes this of everything of the right wing, but they want to go independent? How do you have a conversation with someone like that then?
Well, if you know, I would encourage them if they're going to go independent and they're somebody who's generally inclined to vote Republican, but they're not going to vote Republican, to you know, think about voting Democratic. But if not, think about voting third party, you know, because that's pulling votes away from the GOP.
It was really interesting because, like I said, the conversation I had with this young gentleman, and I've known him for over 15 years, he believes that, you know, religion and politics should be mixed together. He believes that, you know, everything that you've been saying about the right wing. And I was listening to him, and I didn't ask him any questions. And the questions I did ask him, he was puzzled on. So I should have asked him what was his meaning of becoming an independent, because all the independents I know are right in the middle, that they don't pick a party, they're looking at the person. And he is just so far right that I'm just, how's that going to affect the vote?
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's kind of scary when you think about it.
I doubt it's going to affect the vote much. I mean, you know, you've got a lot of Republicans who have left the party just out of distaste, but they're still going to vote for Republican candidates, you know, because they're still, you know, whatever their shtick is, whatever drew them to the GOP in the first place, whether it's white supremacy or whether it's, you know, the rights of women, not wanting women to have any, or whether it's, you know, some other kind of, you know, fear thing.
We're in California. In California, when the primaries come in, you're an independent. You can't vote for your party. Is that correct in California?
I believe California has closed primaries. I could be wrong, but no, actually, it must be that that's not the case any longer, because you've got, isn't it statewide that you've got the jungle primaries, the top two? And sometimes the top two came from the same party? I think, our caller has hung up. I think that California changed the rules in their primaries so that you've got what are called jungle primaries or top two primaries, where basically everybody votes in the primary, and then the top two people who get the most votes have the runoff. You know, it might be that that's regional, that that's just a couple of cities, but I thought that was true all across the state. We'll be right back, 22 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So remember the John Durham investigation in which he said, oh, the FBI never should have looked into Donald Trump's connections to Russia. And I'm scratching my head going, how can he even think this? I mean, the guy that Donald Trump hired as his first campaign manager, Paul Manafort had taken $66 million from oligarchs associated with Vladimir Putin to install Viktor Yanukovych as the dictator of Ukraine. $66 million. He took money from, he was paid $1 million by the dictator of Zaire, back when it was Zaire, to develop a strong relationship with Moscow. And when finally they threw Yanukovych out of Ukraine, that was in 2015. What did Manafort do? He came to the United States and he said to Donald Trump, well, let me help you, while he's taking money from Moscow. I mean, if nothing else, that should have been a starting point, a huge starting point for the FBI. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. So that's, you know, how it might happen in the Middle East, is that, you know, you've got the American fleet, you've got the Chinese fleet, you've got the Russian fleet, you've got Hamas, you've got Israel, and if Iran jumps into this thing, then all bets are off, and it could spiral into a larger war, a World War III. How it begins in Asia, now this is I think the most likely scenario if we're looking at likely scenarios, and that is that President Xi decides that now's the time to take Taiwan. Now, if he decides to do that, the odds are that he's not just going to go take Taiwan, and we're just, you know, the rest of the world is just going to sit around and watch, you know, the way that Putin attacked Ukraine. Instead, I believe that first he would take out any of our American ships in the region, and he would take out our military bases. There's several islands nearby, like Guam, where we have military bases, and probably China would just do a massive bombing campaign, take all that out, and then they would attack Taiwan. And that at that point, the United States will be faced with a choice. What are you going to do? Because China is now a nuclear, nuclear power with intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching any city in America. And are they willing to bluff? Are we willing to bluff? I mean, Xi is doing all but holding up a bullhorn saying that this is what he's going to do. He held a press conference 2 weeks ago in which four times, he declared that he was ready for war with the United States. His defense budget has gone up 100% over the last 10 years. It's up 7% just this year over last year. Only a month ago, 1 month ago, the Chinese government rolled out an 8-part documentary that's played across all of Chinese television about how the Chinese military is now prepared for a war with Taiwan and America. And his Navy and Air Force are regularly harassing American, South Korean, Japanese, and Taiwanese ships in the region and planes in what may, well, but what's being viewed as harassment, but may in fact actually be practice runs. So, be warned, right, or forewarned. That's another possibility. The third possibility is that it all starts as a result of the war in Ukraine, that Putin overreaches, that he thinks that he's on the verge of losing and he starts throwing, tactical nukes into Ukraine or something like that, or that the war spills over into the border with Poland or into Lithuania or Latvia, even Estonia, Finland. Finland's a long way from the Ukrainian border, I get it, but that the war spills over into NATO, and then suddenly NATO is at war with Russia. So, where does all this go? We'll see. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in other happy news, no, seriously, what are your thoughts on this and how this might play out? Hopefully we can avoid the whole thing. I mean, now we've got a steady hand on the tiller with Joe Biden. It's a good thing. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Couple other quick stories for you here in this first hour, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Hopefully our phones are working now. Seems to be. Although you may not hear us on hold. If that's the case, then just know that when I put you on the air, you won't hear that on your radio or TV for 9 seconds because there's a 9-second delay. So listen to your phone as well. Anyhow, 2 quick stories. The FCC is looking into stripping a Fox station in Philadelphia of its broadcast license. Local people have complained that they, by all their lies about the 2020 election, that this Fox station, now this is not Fox News. I'm seeing this reported as Fox News in some places, but Fox News is not carried by over-the-air broadcast stations. It's carried by cable systems, which is a whole different thing. This is apparently one of the Fox stations. There's a whole bunch of them, too. They carry regular programming as well as their own newscasts. but the FCC has announced that they're opening an evidentiary hearing, which has the Fox lawyers totally flipped out. And the Philadelphia activists are quite excited because if they can take down Fox in Philadelphia, then that could be replicated every place in the country. Won't that be interesting? Also, Vladimir Putin's best buddy, Donald Trump, is planning on pulling America out of NATO. Back to my riff about World War III. This is the sort of thing, right? Trump is pushing for a major American foreign policy change in his second administration. This is out of Rolling Stone magazine, published yesterday, that Trump is planning to pull the United States entirely out of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization unless it caves to his demand. And his demand is, if Russia attacks a NATO country, that doesn't count as an attack on one as an attack on all. So Trump's demand is that NATO change its rules so that if Putin decides to attack Poland or Lithuania or Latvia or whatever, NATO doesn't automatically respond. All the NATO countries don't automatically respond. In other words, gut NATO, you know, just basically end its whole purpose for being. So what's on your mind? Let's pick up some of your phone calls here. David, in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Thank you, Guru. Last week, a person called and asked you, why were the Jews sent to Israel after World War II? And you said you didn't know the answer. Well, about a decade ago, I read an editorial written by one of the men who was on the commission to decide where to send the Jews. And you cut towards the end of Schindler's List, where there's a large group of Jews who've just been released from the camps, and they're at a rural crossroads talking to a local, and he's pointing in one direction saying, you can't go over there, they hate you there. He points in the other direction, you can't go over there, they hate you there. So back to the guy who wrote the editorial, he said, we made one critical mistake. We thought that most, if not all, of the people there were nomads. We thought there were very few permanent residents. Cut to an episode of 60 Minutes I saw where there's this old Palestinian woman standing in front of her house that's just been demolished by the Israelis, and she's moaning, my family lived here for 300 years in this house. Cut back to the guy who wrote the article, and he said, in retrospect, we should have brought the Jews to the United States, and then the ones who wanted to immigrate back to Jerusalem would have done so in a slow, orderly process, and there probably wouldn't have been a problem. Best laid plans, Tom.
Yeah. Okay, David. As I said, I don't know enough about the origin, the beginning of Israel to comment on that. So, interesting, very interesting. Dave, thanks very much for the call. I've got a phone number here instead of a name. I'm not sure what happened. I just put you on the air on line 5. What is your name?
Oh, Matt. Matt from Portland.
Oh, okay. Hey, Matt, what's on your mind today? It says you're in San Francisco. Got a 415 number here for you.
Yeah, I've never changed my number since I moved, but yeah, I just saw on Democracy. I saw on Democracy Now that Ro Khanna's political director quit because he wouldn't sign a ceasefire, and I became aware of him based on your show, and I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
I don't know about that, so I can't speak to it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Matt.
Okay.
I just don't know. Fred in Chicago. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Long-time listener. Shout out to the chat room. I haven't been there for a little bit, but I was a little sick. But anyway, you're talking about World War III earlier. Early in the summer, I saw a 60 Minutes segment on the Chinese Navy compared to the U.S. Navy. And one of their biggest concerns of the Chinese, and they were referred to as a brown water navy, but they're adequate enough to invade Taiwan. But the thing was that one of the biggest concerns, talking with the experts in the piece, were American Navy people, were saying that the Chinese have noisy submarines, and us our Navy, we have really, really state-of-the-art stuff. Now, my little cousin was a submariner many years ago, and I don't know how brave you have to be to go under the waves or like a coal miner to go down in a coal shaft. Mm-hmm. But I'm really incensed that Trump might have given up naval secrets to this Australian billionaire. I'm really upset about that.
Yeah. Yeah, he put our entire submarine, all the crews of all our submarines at risk and put our Navy at risk. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. I have a feeling Trump just spilled classified information all over the place.
Our Navy is one of our most, that's the point of the spear. I mean, our Navy is the envy of the world. Yeah, and now Trump's ally, Tommy Tuberville, the guy who was in Trump's hotel on January 5th, on the night of January 5th before January 6th, in planning sessions with Eric and Don Jr., that guy is preventing the Navy from having a commander right now. Oh, wow, yeah. Well, all I know is that this segment, I implore everybody to check it out if they can. 60 Minutes, they all agree that the Chinese make noisy submarines, and that's not good for the Chinese. Yeah. They want our technology is what they want. They got good technology, but they want ours. I get it. We got really better stuff. Yeah. All right, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I know you're busy. Thanks a lot, Fred. Okay. Good talking to you. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I agree with all your scenarios of how we could end up in World War III. I just don't see if it happens how we get out of it without a nuclear exchange somewhere.
I think mutual assured destruction is still very much a thing.
Yeah, but all these sides are talking about tactical nukes now.
Well, a war with tactical nukes would not surprise me at all. I mean, if you look at the history of warfare, what was it, 1190 that the Pope made this announcement that the end days, the Revelation end days were definitely here because the ultimate weapon that can destroy any army on earth has been invented, and therefore it's the end of time. And then he was talking about the crossbow. I mean, every time somebody develops a new military technology or a technology that can be adapted to the military, it ends up in the next war. Excuse me, pardon my sneeze.
Do you really think, though, if they start using tactical nukes, it's going to stay at that level?
I do. I don't think anybody wants to. I think a world war reaching the point where we're throwing a nuke at Beijing and they're throwing one at New York, I just don't see that happening. I don't think that any of the countries. Now, the one wild card might be, and there are reports in the media. They have not yet made their way to the classic mainstream media. The New York Times, the Washington Post, and that kind of thing. But there are multiple reports on social media that yesterday or the day before yesterday, Vladimir Putin had a heart attack. Now, if he thinks he's dying or if he thinks he's going down in flames and this is his last chance to establish or reestablish the empire that Catherine the Great created back in the 1700s, I could see him possibly starting a nuclear war, doing a nuclear exchange. But even then, I'm skeptical of it, Mark. I mean, maybe I'm Pollyanna here, but I just, what country would take that kind of risk?
Nobody thought the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was going to cause World War I either.
Well, that's a very different thing. I mean, that's a very small event that produced.
What I'm saying is stuff spins out of control. You can't. You never know where it ends up when you start this stuff.
You're absolutely right, and that's the problem. I mean, war is a very, very treacherous thing, and you never know where it's going to go. You never know what you're going to know or not know, or how it's going to play out. I do think, though, that I'm not so concerned about the old nuclear winter. Nuclear bomb's going to end the world thing. I'm far more concerned about regional conflicts becoming internationalized without that. Mark, thanks for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back, Malcolm in Bluebell, Pennsylvania. Hey, Malcolm, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom. My question is, I'm not sure how strategically, just realistically, how the United States would fare off in a conflict with China, considering how dependent we are on China for their goods and services.
Well, that's a point I make in my article, Malcolm, that I didn't get into while I was, going through it on the air, and I probably should have. And that is that, if we got into a direct conflict with China, then all imports or most imports from China would come to a grinding halt. And within a matter of a couple of weeks, there would be no more pharmaceuticals in the United States because most of our drugs either come from China or virtually all of the raw materials. Most of our drugs are actually made in India, but the raw materials come out of China. So you've got that problem. Obviously consumer goods, clothes, toys, computers, TVs, washing machines, all that stuff, that would all vanish in a matter of weeks. I agree with your assessment, Malcolm. I think it would produce a Great Depression that would make the Republican Great Depression in the 1930s look like a walk in the park.
Right. And see, Trump, he said that he would bring factories back to the U.S., but if anything, they incentivize more corporations to move abroad for tax credits and things of that nature. And I don't know how you defeat essentially China as a superpower. And in this day and age, it takes a lot more than Americans thinking we're superior to defeat a country that literally we rely upon them for everything. And I don't even know if sanctions like what they imposed on Russia would be effective here, considering how much land China owns here. If you remember during COVID, the meatpacking plant that Trump ordered back in service was owned by China.
Is owned by China. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or majority owned by China.
When you mention presidents and inheritance, Crawford Ranch in Texas was known as the White House, Western White House, because Bush did, in fact, take a lot of vacations. And it's safe to say that Trump moved the White House to Florida with Mar-a-Lago. Yeah. So in terms of inheritance, it may have made kids lazier. That's all. They both inherited fortunes from their parents.
There you go. Okay, good example, Malcolm. Malcolm, thank you very much for the call. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I wanted to get your opinion about the Supreme Court. What if instead of having a president picking judges for the Supreme Court, each party selects 5 judges each, and that's all they can have. And that way you eliminate this stuck in the Supreme Court with one-sided judges. What do you think about that?
You mean each party would put up 5 people and then the Senate would decide 1 out of those 10? Or you mean each party gets 5 shots at it before the other party gets the next 5 shots? Is that? I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about.
Each party selects 5 judges, and that's all they can select. That way, you have an evenly distributed Supreme Court, right, instead of having this, stack up,
So you'd have some seats. Well, the problem is the number of justices is an odd number. It's 9, so you can't. You can't split one down the middle.
Well, why can't you have just 5 and 5, or 4 and 4?
Well, because then you could have ties at the Supreme Court, which I suppose wouldn't be a disaster. I mean, ties typically lose in those kind of situations. Interesting.
Well, they will have to, figure it out within themselves each case. But yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Interesting. Thank you, Alfredo. We'll be right back. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. So the witch hunts really began in a big way in the 1500s as a consequence, in large part, of the Protestant Reformation. There was this competition between the Protestant churches and the Catholic churches for who could be most effective at keeping Satan at bay, in other words, punishing the witches. And it became like a competitive thing, sort of like Democrats and Republicans competing for your vote, literally, seriously. In addition, there were attacks on women who were performing abortions. most of the abortionists in that era were women, and they were being attacked for being witches, and that was because they were denying the feudal lords who owned the serfs and their children cheap labor, which was the children. So you combine these things, and you know, today we're seeing something very similar to both of these dynamics at play. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Nancy in Minneapolis. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So last week you had a listener that was talking about how Britain was responsible for the Middle East. So I did some research because that really puzzled me. And I found that the UK is debating this quite profusely. And there's one author that I think may be worthwhile listening to. His name is Peter Shambrook. He wrote Policy of Deceit. He looked at the archives, the British archives from 1914 to 1939 to see what Britain was doing and how they were communicating. So during World War I, just to remind listeners, it was Britain, France, and Russia were fighting Austria, Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. So Britain really was thirsty for the Ottoman Empire land. And so Britain talked to some Arabian leaders and said, look, you don't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire. Why don't you create a revolt? That will help us win the war. And when we win the war, we will give you Palestine, and you can have your own independent state. They said, great. Therefore, you have Lawrence of Arabia. Then Britain went to the Zionist Jews and said, you help us win the war, and we will give you Palestine, and you can have your own independent state. Great. So then they had the Balfour Declaration.
Right.
Britain also said that France could have Palestine too. But in the end, in the Treaty of Versailles, Britain was the one that had Palestine. And in the Treaty of Versailles, it says that Britain is supposed to, control Palestine, but they need to have independent states for the Palestinians and everybody else that was living there. They agreed to that. But what Britain did, since it was an empire at that time, what Britain does all the time, you flood the zone with the people that you want to control it and kick out the natives.
Right, ethnic cleansing.
Yeah. So they flooded it with European Jews so that they could control that. And so the Jews that had a population of 8% in Palestine went up to 50% by the end of World War II. And then they said, okay, now you can have an independent state. Well, the native people were out of luck at that point. Right. They were totally
outnumbered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting, Nancy. It's the complexity of the history of this region never ceases to amaze me. Nancy, thanks for the call and for the history lesson. I appreciate it. David in North Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? David, listening on WCPT in North Miami Beach. Hey, you're on the air. David, David, you are on the air.
Yes, sir.
What's up?
With some music. Yes, sir. So my question is, now that I'm not a mayoral candidate, is it possible World War III will occur because we have people, who avoided the Vietnam War, but are living longer on the one side, and on the other side, what Dario Moreno would call the weaker partner problem, the way that Serbia and Austro-Hungarian Empire dragged in the bigger powers?
Well, that was essentially what happened in World War I. Was mutual defense treaties got invoked, and that could certainly happen. I mean, NATO is the example of that on steroids.
Well,
I have no idea
NATO.
what you're talking about.
Well, we don't even need NATO, okay? With Hamas dragging in Iran and, in theory, Russia, Israel dragging in America. Of course, the whole point of the Ukraine deal was to prevent all this, but everyone's forgotten that was an anti-proliferation deal, not just mutual.
You're talking the Budapest Accords, where Russia, Britain, and the United States.
The actual deal, not the imagined one that was supposed to keep Ukraine out of NATO, right? The larger problem being, the problem of delayed conflict. Like, imagine that the Civil War was started by people who had heard heroic tales of young Lincoln and young Jefferson Davis and their service in the Black Hawk War. So it's not even the previous war, which everyone thought, oh, well, that was simple enough. We could do that again, no problem. Not realizing, no, they're actually trying to do some half-remembered story, just like how a lot of right-wing news mangles actual facts into what's otherwise indescribable, or they never learned it in the first place.
Yeah.
It's scholasticism gone wild of commentary on commentary on commentary until the original fact is a footnote.
Well, certainly that's, there's a lot of that going on right now. I mean, that's what Donald Trump's trying to do around January 6th, for example. David, thank you for the call. There's a lot to process there. Well, we'll continue on the other side of this break. Nina Turner is going to drop by and tell us about the new organization she's creating. And also I want to talk about the dangers in viewing ADHD as a disorder. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and Hartmann Report.
We take life back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious. Whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity. A hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African hair and white beard, he looked like a prince, and he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sékou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sékou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the civil rights movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a Black Power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome to the second hour of our program. Over at the House of Representatives, by the way, just to keep you up to date, Tom Emmer is the nominee now. His vote, the vote will go to the floor probably in the next hour or two. He's arguably the most moderate of the 9 Republicans. He voted in favor of legalizing same-sex marriage. He supports aid to Ukraine. He voted along with Republicans, or along with Democrats, rather, to keep the budget to stop the government shutdown. He voted in favor of Joe Biden being president. He's one of only 2 out of the 8 or 9 who they can say that of. So, we'll see. I'll keep you up to date. On the line with us is our old friend Nina Turner, the hell-raising humanitarian, and thought leader and senior fellow at the New School Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. She served on Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns as a national surrogate in 2016 and national co-chair in 2020. The Honorable Nina Turner is the former Ohio State Senator and the founder of a new organization, WeAreSomebody.org. And Nina, welcome back. It's great to have you with us.
Yeah, it's been way too long.
I agree. So tell us about, Senator, tell us about WeAreSomebody.org.
Well, it is a capacity building organization for the working class. And Tom, we know the advent or the rise of the 21st century unionist movement is in full effect as various unions across various sectors, from teachers to nurses to UPS workers, which thank God they were able to get their contract that they wanted. The UAW's out on strike right now, the Starbucks workers, you name it. People are rising up to say that they deserve better benefits, better wages, and better work conditions. And so We Are Somebody seeks to be in this fight and to be able to amplify, organize, and help to fund for workers on the front lines, and not just those who are already in a labor union, but also those who are fighting to join or to create unions.
So if somebody goes to WeAreSomebody.org and signs up, what can they expect to get? What kind of communication will they have with you? How can they pitch in? What are the opportunities and options that are available?
Yeah, they'll have they'll get regular email updates, absolutely. But when they donate, those donations go to help shore up workers on the front lines. We have a special portal on the website for the House of Labor. And I'm using that very broadly, Tom, because we know that the majority of the American people are not in labor unions, and we need non-labor workers and non-union workers, I should say, and union workers to see themselves as one in the same. Workers are catching the same type of hell in this country, and we need to come together collectively. One of our first major actions or collaborations will be with the Amazon Labor Union. That is led by none other trailblazer, the trailblazer at the Amazon Labor Union, Christian Smalls, who, as you know, defied all the odds at that Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, fighting during the time of COVID to really save the lives of the workers that he was in charge of, only to be fired for standing up. And because his labor union, by way of example, one of the reasons why we want to start with him first is that although the Amazon Labor Union is recognized by the National Labor Relations Board, he's not collecting dues right now because he is fighting for those workers to get higher wages. He understands how hard it is. And so we're going to be helping them with tech support. We're going to be helping them with other administrative things that they need, and to amplify their voices there. But we won't stop there. On the other end of the spectrum, we are also working with One Fair Wage, which you may be familiar with. This organization led by a wonderful champion. Her first name is Saru, and she's working and her team to eradicate the sub-minimum wage. I think when we go out to eat from time to time, we forget that many of the people who serve us that food, they are only making on average $2.13, and they depend on tips. If we ended that sub-minimum wage, that would increase their wages exponentially and really help them to fight. And most workers in the restaurant industry do not have a union to help them. So donations would be going to them. We are utilizing the nonprofit standards of 80% of the donations going towards those actions, and only 20% for administrative costs, Tom. And so we've received lots of inquiries through our labor portal, which we're happy for people asking for our help.
That is absolutely great. I think also, a lot of people don't realize that the reason why, when the minimum wage was put into law back in the 1930s, the reason why it doesn't cover, or in some cases only minimally covers, with a $2 and some odd, cent minimum wage, tipped workers and agricultural workers, is because those were principally people of color at the time, and the Southern right-wingers, the Dixiecrats, did not want a minimum wage for black people in the South, and that's how they got around it, which is just an obscene history. I mean, just based on that history, we should just wipe out those categories and say the minimum wage applies to everybody.
That's exactly right, Tom, and thanks for sharing that history. Most people don't know that, and it is through my work with One Fair Wage that I came to understand that. But as you were talking about the book, I was listening to the book, bringing up FDR. We know about the New Deal and the shenanigans that the Southern Democrats, AKA the Dixiecrats, pulled even when it came to the New Deal and Social Security and taking out and cutting out domestic workers, which are primarily black women and also farmers. So same thing that they did with the sub-minimum wage. It is absolutely a fascinating history, and we all should care about it.
Yeah, it really is. We're talking with Senator Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator, now the founder of, she describes herself as a hell-raising humanitarian on our website. We are now the founder of WeAreSomebody.org, a new organization. Strike for All is the Twitter handle, or at Nina Turner on Twitter as well, or X, or whatever you want to call it. Nina, I'm curious your thoughts on what's going on in your state, in Ohio. There's all this stuff around the abortion measure on the ballot. You've got a major gerrymandering fight going on. Your state, your governor is the guy who actually was a previous governor, is John Kasich, who took to the Supreme Court the right of Republican administrations to purge massive numbers of mostly people living in big cities in Ohio from the voting rolls, and won that case. So now, you've got states, millions of people are being purged from voting rolls, particularly in blue cities and red states as a result of that. What's going on in Ohio? And what does that tell you about the future?
I mean, Tom, there was a time, and I'm sure you recall, where my state used to be a solid swing state. It was state that politicians running nationally, they wanted to be in Ohio to catch the measure. Now it is solidly red, and just getting redder from the time that I was in the General Assembly to right now. And a lot of disgusting things are coming forth. The Republicans have beyond a supermajority right now. They don't need Democrats to do anything. They could totally conduct the people's business, and I use that term lightly, without Democrats even showing up. So you name right now, and they were knocked down in the primary on issue 1, and I believe that issue 1 during this general election, which is the abortion issue, that the voters of the state are going to knock them down on that too. It is really curious to me that the party that purports itself to be a party of freedom and a party of less government always wants government to be small enough to fit into a woman's womb or to tell a woman what to do. I believe that this state, just as we did in 2011, you remember that big fight over collective bargaining, again, pushed by the Republicans, but the people of the state knocked that down. And I believe that the people of the state is going to knock down the excessive abortion or stripping away of abortion access here in the state of Ohio. Also, legalizing marijuana for recreational use will be on the ballot as well. And one of the things, this will definitely drive out more voters. And then depending on where people live, county by county, there'll be issues on the ballot for either health or human resources or levies for public colleges and universities. But I think we're going to push back, Tom. It is curious to me, and I would love to know what you think. On one hand, the voters of the state, and you talked about gerrymandering, that's another major reason why they being the Republicans have such a stronghold on this state and many other states. But it's just really curious to me that they find it okay for politicians to choose their constituents instead of the other way around. But the beauty of Ohio, because I'm still trying to find that bright light, is that when people are able to bring initiatives to the ballot, the voters of the state, even though the legislature is extraordinarily red, they tend to bring back the stasis, Tom, and I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when you talk to people about Obamacare, and they'll say, oh, no, I don't like that. But then when you talk about the individual pieces of it, they're like, oh, yeah, I like that, and I like that, and I like that. Same thing with, the Biden's accomplishments. They'll say, oh, he hasn't accomplished anything. Well, what do you think about the CHIPS Act? And you give some details, or the infrastructure bill, or the American Rescue Act. And they're, oh, yeah, this is great stuff. Yeah, yeah. I think it's just people just don't know, frankly. And there's an awful lot of tribalism of, well, it came out of a Democratic administration, it can't be good, or, that kind of thing. But
sure.
That's my sense of it. So, yeah. So Senator Nina Turner is launching this new organization. It's wearesomebody.org. Get over there, check it out, sign up. I think you'll find it absolutely fascinating. Nina, I wish you the very best with it. Keep us updated on how it's going, okay?
Thank you. Will do, Tom. The best to you, your family, and the team.
Thank you. Yeah, say hi to, is it Fred? Jeff. Yeah. say hi to Jeffrey for us.
I will do.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. Good talking to you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
17 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's pick up some calls here. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I have a slightly different take on thermonuclear war than what you were talking about.
Love to hear it.
And I hate to say it, too. And I think there's enough people out there with a suicide bomber type mentality who feel that if they can blow themselves up and the world at the same time, they will be the first ones into heaven with 76 virgins.
Yeah. It makes sense. It's not, and there's, we've got a Christian version of this too, with the end times people, and the rapture is coming and all this kind of stuff.
Yes, exactly. I hadn't thought of that point. You're right. Yes. Yeah. And that's the part that concerns me. I don't want to over worry people, but when I heard you talking about it, I said, gee, that is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in Israel, you've got the hardcore Jews who are, waiting for Messiah too, the Mashiach now, bumper stickers and whatnot. So it's like every one of the Abrahamic, if I'm saying it right, religions, has an element of this kind of millennialist ideology, as does Hinduism to some extent as well, and a lot of the subsets of it. So I don't know how it all plays in together, Ziggy. It makes me nervous.
Neither do I. Yeah. I just thought I'd mention that point. That's all.
Good talking to you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
On that good note, I'll let you go.
Okay. Have a good one. Yep. Ramon in Loveville, Maryland. Hey, Ramon, what's on your mind today? Ramon? Okay, that's not what I want to hear. Pat in San Diego. Hey, Pat, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi. Thank you very much. Earlier you were talking about somehow the convoluted California primary system came up, and I thought I'd call and see if I could help clarify that.
Thank you. Okay, tell us all about it, Pat.
Well, other than president, it's top two up and down the state. That's why we can have actually a couple dozen governor candidates. It's top two. I actually ran an assembly race in 2012, and it was the first year, and it's not a runoff. It's whoever's the top two, whether it's 90-10, goes on to the general election. The confusion is because when it comes to the presidential race, it's still a partisan primary. So people that are registered, not declined to state, then yes, and actually that happened when the Bernie stuff in 2016, because some of his people were saying, register independent and then vote for Bernie in the primary, and of course that didn't allow them to vote in the primary. So there was because from governor on down, and that's why you can have two Republicans or two Democrats in, say, an assembly or state senate race. And
I didn't realize that California. I knew that you had the top two system, and you could have two Democrats in a race. I remember when my friend Marianne Williamson was doing that several years ago.
Yes.
And I remember that. Or I thought I remembered that you had closed primaries for president, and I couldn't compute how you could have both, and you just explained it. Pat, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
Good to hear from you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, Pat. You too. It's 21 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. And voter fraud is caused by black people. And gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story, reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 22 minutes past the hour. Over on our science site, as it were, this is about ADHD. We've got a new website specifically about ADHD. It's called hunterinfarmersworld.com. And the piece that I published there yesterday morning is titled Exposed: The Dangers in Viewing ADHD as a Disorder. And in this article, I'm quoting a number of people who are publishing books and articles and whatnot, suggesting that people with ADHD should not have children because it's, polluting our gene pool, that ADHD is a failure of evolution, that people with ADHD are less evolved. This is the language of eugenics, right? This is the language of genocide, frankly. And I cite a number of these. Let's not forget the eugenics movement, while it arguably started in the United Kingdom, became big here in the United States in the period from 1900 roughly until the 1930s, and really until the 1940s. It wasn't until after the horrors of Hitler's death camps came out that American eugenicists stopped proudly calling themselves American eugenicists. Every state in the Union had laws requiring compulsory sterilization of people who were, quote, mentally retarded, or, in some cases, even, this was the result, this was how they'd respond to miscegenation, interracial relationships. So the danger of viewing anything as a genetic disorder and then saying that there's absolutely no value to that. And there's a number of people who actually come right out and essentially say that. Russell Barkley is probably the leading spokesman for the "you're all sick" faction within the psychiatric community that views ADHD as a disorder rather than as a difference. I'm arguing that ADHD is actually a collection of behaviors, of skills that normal people don't have, that would be ideal for a person in a hunting-gathering society, male or female. That, the three principal characteristics of ADHD, distractibility, impulsivity, and a need for high levels of stimulation or risk-taking, those three things would drive a person to success in a hunting-gathering world. Distractibility, they're noticing everything around them all the time. Impulsivity, they can make a quick decision. They're chasing a rabbit through the forest and suddenly a deer goes by. You don't want to sit down with a pad and pen and do a risk-benefit analysis. You make an instant decision. That's impulsivity. And high levels of stress or high levels of engagement or high levels of wanting high levels of challenge, of stimulation. That's, you can call that hyperactivity. You can also call it, that's the guy who goes out and gets things done. So, I'm arguing that there is a very real and significant upside to ADHD, that our society would be very, very different if it wasn't for ADHD individuals, people like Ben Franklin or, Thomas Edison, the classic ADHDers, who transformed the world, who made the world a better place. So this piece in today's hunterandafarmersworld.com titled "Expose the Danger in Viewing ADHD as a Disorder" is really, I'm just taking on those people who over the last few years have been saying, oh no, it's just a disease, there's no good to it, just ignore those people who are saying there's something to it. No, I'm saying that there is some value to ADHD. There's a value to society, there's a value to the individuals. You don't want to weed it out of your gene pool, and you don't want to be punishing it. And, I realize that there are many people with ADHD who will benefit tremendously from medication. But if the goal is to get rid of the ADHD, to rip it out of society, then, that can be problematic too, even when it's done with medication. So those are my thoughts on that. You can read all about it at hunterandafarmersworld.com. I'll be right back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls on the other side of this break, 27 minutes past the hour. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lord serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour, and let's see here. Oh, yeah, I've covered everything I was going to cover. So picking up your phone calls here. Ken in La Center, Washington. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey there, Confrere. I'm calling with a sort of wild card scenario for start of World War III. This is something I got from a geography teacher in high school. He was also the one that told us that, and I called you about this a couple of years ago, how the population in the U.S. would be whites and minority by 2040.
Mm-hmm.
He also came up with a scenario for World War III that would start with China and India, which are the two most populous countries. I think India surpassed China now. It's also one a dictatorship and the other pretty much a democracy. Just wondering what you think about that idea.
I think that Modi is moving, the Prime Minister or President, I think it's Prime Minister of India, is moving that country rapidly in a right-wing authoritarian strongman direction, which over time will probably end up aligning him closer to China and Russia than to the United States and the West. Right now, he's kind of got his cake and eating it too. He's got both, and it's going to be interesting to see how this works out for him. He's also been using ethnic and sectarian differences as essentially a political weapon. So. I don't know how it's going to shake out. I have high hopes for India. I've spent a lot of time in India. I love India. It's a beautiful country, wonderful people. But some real challenges.
There's been some border skirmishes in the recent past, haven't there?
Yeah, up near Kashmir. But that's not been so much with China. That's been with Pakistan, I believe. Because Pakistan was created by splitting out of India. So. Ken, thank you.
Okay.
Interesting stuff. I appreciate the contribution to the conversation. Lee in Laurel, Mississippi. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you, man.
Thank you.
It's been a few weeks. You and I were talking about President Trump and, whether or not, what we're witnessing in terms of him being held accountable, had anything to do with white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wanted to pick up that thought if you got a second.
Go for it.
Namely, one of the things I notice in our society and that makes it difficult to talk about the topic of race is that the dynamic usually pits, people from one group against another, and as soon as I start talking about something like white supremacy, people's defenses start going up. When in reality, it shouldn't be, a black versus white. It should be, or any race versus any other race. It should be all of the races versus the supremacy, because supremacy and the racism that fosters it is a poison. And sure, poison may go down sweeter from some members of society than others, but just because the poison goes down sweet doesn't mean it's not poison. Yeah. And I guess what I'm getting at is we have to really take a good hard look at what white supremacy is costing white Americans, even those who in some ways benefit from it. But if the whole thing goes up in smoke, if democracy goes up in smoke, then nobody benefits. Yeah, and it's a tough one to communicate to white people, Lee. I was on Karen Hunter's show the other day, and she does a show on Sirius XM Urban View. She's one of the best people in radio. She and Joe Madison and Randy Rhodes are the three real radio professionals that I just constantly amaze me with their talent. Anyhow, I was on Karen's show, and she asked me, what does being white mean to you? And I gave her the answer that I try to give to white people, which is, because it causes them to go,
it's not a slap in the face. It causes them to go, oh, really? Really? And that is, when I go into a restaurant and I get a crappy table, I don't have to wonder, is that because of the color of my skin? If I go into a store and somebody follows me, and nobody follows me around, or somebody appears to be following me around, I don't have to wonder, is that because of the color of my skin? If I apply for a job and I don't get it, I don't have to think, is that because of the color of my skin? That's the benefit of white privilege to white people that most white people are completely unaware of and never think about. And so anyhow, I said that to Karen, and her response was, more or less, was, well, you seem kind of smug about that, like I was bragging about it, but it's the only way that I've found to communicate how white privilege works to white people in a way that causes them to suddenly understand it. That if you're not white, then you have to think about those things every time you walk out of the house, or even when you answer the phone, for that matter. Go ahead.
The thing I just kind of want to drive home is if we keep that perspective, if we stay with the perspective that it's costing white Americans too, then what you begin to realize is when black people or people of color are talking about injustice in policing, when we're talking about unfair housing and what's going on in the environment relative to communities of color, what you begin to realize is that the people of color are the, quote, canaries in the coal mine.
Yep.
And those same problems are coming for white America next. So if you don't want to see those problems in your own backyard, help us solve them in the other ones.
There you go. Yeah, well said. Absolutely, Lee. And there's, and you see this in states like West Virginia that have very small minority populations, but still have, this huge bifurcation between rich people and poor people, and the poor people are just constantly being crapped on, by the rich people in the state, by the power structure of the state.
Right.
Yeah, excellent. And that's not so much white supremacy as it is, rich supremacy, which is a thing too. The very wealthy people, morbidly rich people who are convinced that they're that way because God loves them, or because they have better genes, or because they're geniuses and they did some brilliant thing, when in fact 9 times out of 10 it's mostly luck. Sometimes.
Well, I'll say this in closing, Tom. Yeah. The greatest threat to white supremacy is when poor whites and poor blacks realize that we really have more in common.
Oh, that's why they assassinated Martin Luther King. He was giving a speech to a bunch of white garbage collectors. I mean, it's like, you all need to get together. Yeah, spot on. Lee, thank you very much for the call. Good talking to you. Jim in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I think I got you on speakerphone, but
that's quite all right. As long as your mouth is close to the microphone, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. So I wanted to say a couple of things. World War I, there's been 25,000 articles and books written about what started World War I. World War I.
None of them agree, right?
Yeah, they're still debating it. But here's the thing. It defined the 20th century, and it defined the 21st century. You'd think we'd want to know.
Right.
But one thing is true that I did find out was there was a big arms buildup before that war started. Like, for example, Bethlehem Steel profits went up 500% just on orders from England before we even got in that war.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Woodrow Wilson was building up the U.S. military, and it was causing Republicans in Congress to just scream loudly. I mean, there was a huge anti-war movement in the United States. And finally he got the Alien Sedition Act passed that shut down the anti-war folks. In fact, Eugene Debs went to prison. And then you saw the same thing with World War II, starting in 1938, late 1938, early 1939. Franklin Roosevelt started, building war material, started getting ready to go into the war. And again, you had all these Republicans in Congress who were yelling and screaming about it, trying to cut off funding and everything else. Because, Mr. Hitler's never going to bother us, and, he's not that bad a guy after all, et cetera, et cetera.
Did you hear about how, I just heard this morning, that because we got into World War I, because of Wilson, the Democrats were out of power for the next 12 years. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
That's a good question. It's possible.
It's something Biden should take note of.
Yeah, 1920 was the turning point election. 1920 was the year that the Republican Party basically officially abandoned its progressive wing, which was the two previous Republican presidents, Taft and Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. And, and Warren Harding came in, and he had two campaign slogans in the election of 1920. One was a return to normalcy, and what that meant was dropping Woodrow Wilson's 91% top income tax bracket, which was rationalized by World War I, dropping that back down to 25%, which Harding did, by the way. And the other was more business in government, less government in business. In other words, privatize, deregulate. And he did those things too, and that's what led, over the course of his administration, the Coolidge administration that followed it, and then the Hoover administration that followed that. That's what led right to, Black Tuesday in October 29th, I think it was 1929, or October, whatever it was, in 1929 when the stock market crashed. And thus we got the Republican Great Depression. So
one more thing I wanted to tell you about was that before this attack, this Hamas attack, I really didn't know that much about what was going on in Israel.
Yeah.
And hello?
Yeah,
Still
no,
there?
I'm listening. Yeah.
And I went on YouTube, saw about 30 different videos, and they're extraordinarily informative. I would recommend everybody who wants and needs to know about what's really going on there.
Yeah.
Watch.
Be careful,
a lot
though.
of
There's an awful lot of misinformation out there, too. But, Jim, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
There is there is a fair amount of really good stuff, though, being written about what's going on. In fact, Tom Friedman's column in the New York Times a couple days ago was brilliant. And welcome back. Dick in Peterson, Iowa. Hey, Dick, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech. Hey.
Oh, you bet. I was thinking about the woke issue. I've heard you on your advertisement there of what to say, and my neighbor accused me here a while back of being woke on the book banning issue, and I just simply said, well, what are you trying to tell me, that you're asleep on the issue? And kind of ended it right there.
Yeah.
We still debate, but now we can have a debate because they use this woke thing so they don't have to debate.
Right.
They just say it's already done and over.
Yeah.
You're woke.
Yeah.
And so they just say I've won the debate and that's it.
That's weird. That's downright
Yeah.
weird. So he thinks that once he's got you to say yes, I'm woke, that's the end. That's very strange, Dick.
Pretty much.
Yeah, well, I think you've got the perfect answer. Does that mean you're asleep? Dick, thanks a lot for that. Thanks for calling and sharing that. Regina in Chicago. Hey, Regina, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, wow, that's weird with your phone thing you got going on. Because it queued into my car, and I was thinking something was wrong with the car phone.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's not that I disagree with you, Tom. I know it's been a while since I've called in. But let me add this to what you were saying about ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
My son that I raised had ADHD.
Mine too.
And I was going through great difficulty in the black community as far as trying to get help. Now, we're talking 30 years ago.
Right. About the same time we did.
Mm-hmm. And so what I found, now I'm a special education teacher, so I was dealing with a lot of these things in my classroom, but I was still learning a lot, because it's different when it's in your household and when you're trying to learn. But here's the thing. Think about this. That impulsivity can be a deterrent. It can be your downfall, too.
Oh, sure.
Because what I'm looking at on the streets of many of the cities, but especially here in Chicago, that impulsivity that may be affecting so many of our young black men, it makes them pick up a gun and go do this and not thinking about it, and it's dark. Oh, good, you agree with me, because sometimes I just think that in this country today, mental illnesses are just not talked about properly or dealt with properly
Agreed.
anymore.
Agreed. And mental differences, as well as mental illnesses. Just the huge variety of humanity is not accepted. We just all want one homogenized version.
Right. When we're forced to look at people that we have elected in Congress, half of them are, I don't want to use the word nuts, but for them I'll say it.
It's a fine clinical term, Regina.
For them I'll say it, because half of those people, they got serious issues.
Yeah,
and
I
they
agree.
don't need to. Oh.
I agree.
Good. Good.
Yeah,
we just need to talk about mental illness more.
I'm with you, Regina. I completely agree. Thank you so much for the calls. It's always so nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stay tuned. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. 1/4 of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at hartmanreport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Welcome back. 8 minutes before the hour, and Bob in San Jose. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Well, I think something interesting. I think all people have this. They're like filters that allow things that change to get our attention more than things that don't change. And that's the reason why many advertising signs have things that flash in them.
Sure.
That catches our attention. I think as people with attention deficit, we are even more, I guess you could say, tuned to change. That the slight changes that other people don't even notice, we do.
I agree.
We're constantly being distracted by them.
I agree, and I can tell you, and my wife, who is the farmer in the family, I'm constantly noticing stuff around, and she's constantly saying, "Pay attention." I'm very familiar with this, Bob.
Yeah, the reason I mention this is, as I understand at one time, I heard that frogs don't see things that don't move. They only see the insects that do move, and that's how they can find their prey easier.
Yes.
And I wonder if human beings have a similar, but not quite as absolute a filter.
We do. It's built into every animal. Every animal. Motion.
Yeah.
Motion is what triggers every animal. It's why rabbits freeze. We've got a bunch of bunnies that live near us, and in fact they've been going after Louise's garden, and they could be right out there in the open, and you walk by and they just freeze, right? Because they think, if I don't move, he can't see me, because that's how it is with hawks, I guess.
Well, it could also be that even things that like wolves and coyotes would walk right past a rabbit if it didn't move.
Apparently, that's why they do it. That's why possums play possum. Yeah, excellent point, Bob.
Yeah.
Excellent, Bob.
Anyway, I'm saying I think we are more sensitive to motion than
I agree.
Average people.
I'm completely agreeing with your analysis. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bob. Good talking to you. Leonard in Albany, New York. Hey, Leonard, what's on your mind today?
How you doing? I want to talk about China and the United States going to war.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that China have a lot to lose going to war with the United States because their economy is run by the United States and Europe. So
we are their largest customers, absolutely.
That's what we are, their largest customers. And if they go to war with us, their GDP and their economy will be shot just like Russia.
Yeah.
Thought that.
What they've got to be debating is the short-term damage to the economy, because now they've got a consumer economy. The Chinese middle class is larger than the entire population of the United States. And only 43% of us are in the middle class. So their middle class is 2 or 3 times larger than ours. So they have finally reached the point where they have a large enough internal market that they may think that they can jettison their external markets and survive it.
Well, what about all American corporations that are over there? They will pull out of there.
They will,
and they won't have nowhere to sell. And it would be kind of messed up for the Chinese that are in the United States, because you know how this country is.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody have a battle over there, the people who are from there will hate on the other person and stuff. So the Chinese restaurants, Chinese business would start failing in the United States too, because a lot of people won't go to the Chinese restaurants.
Yeah, we saw a small taste of this, Leonard, when Donald Trump started his racist China virus stuff. Remember?
Well,
and then people were getting beat up in Chinatowns all across the country.
Right. I think that's what started the whole China relationship with the United States, because of Trump threatening China this, China that, and China said enough. Hey.
And he wouldn't do it with Russia, because Russia is white Christians. China is.
Well, he wouldn't do it with Russia because Putin got dirt on him, so he ain't gonna do it to Russia. Yeah. He want Russia to succeed. He might as well move to Russia.
Yeah. Well, he tried to. I mean, the thing that we learned after the election of 2016 was that about 2 weeks before the election, he signed a contract with Putin to build a Trump hotel in Moscow. He was planning on losing the election and building a hotel in Moscow and getting rich there. I mean, now he's doing it in Oman. They've got a $5 billion project in Oman, and Donald Trump's got a big piece of that. So, he's making his money in the Middle East, I guess. Leonard, I got to move along, but here, thank you so much for the call. You're spot on. I completely agree with your analysis. It's, we're hitting the top of the hour. On the other side of this break, we'll be back with Greg Palast. If you haven't seen the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, you're going to want to see this movie. It's amazing. And B, you're going to want to pay attention to my next guest. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and Hartmann Report.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Coke's products without ever seeing Coke's name attached. Coke refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia-Pacific panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Coke Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Cokeland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His latest film in the making is Long Knife, Osage Oil and the New Trail of Tears. You can watch a 100-second teaser over at gregpalast.com, G-R-E-G-B-A-L-A-S-T. Greg_Palast is his Twitter handle. GregPalast.com, though, is the website. And this is all apropos of Leo DiCaprio's new movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. Greg, welcome back to the program. Give us a kind of a backstory here. Why, who were the Osage, and why make a movie out of it?
Two movies out of it. That's what's happening. So we have the film Killers of the Flower Moon. I think you may have heard of it, unless you've been hiding under a rock.
I saw it on Sunday.
Yes, so it's a work of genius, but more important, it's a work of real history. That it's about time we learn about what happened to Native American natives, but in particular the Osage tribe, who I started working with almost 3 decades ago. After Killers of the Flower Moon, just quickly what happens is that there was the biggest oil strike in America at the time in the 1920s under Osage land. These Indians per capita became the richest people on the planet, and the U.S. government and the big oil companies that were just forming, they actually hadn't formed yet. They would form out of the Osage land. And what they did was they auctioned off the Osage land to the big oil companies that created Getty Oil, ConocoPhillips, Exxon came out of there. They were nothing until then. And then each full-blooded Osage was assigned a guardian because they were considered incompetent, unable to handle their own affairs. But I should mention that they'd used their money to they went to Stanford, Oxford, UCLA, USC. And they were listed as incompetent, unable to handle their own affairs.
Right. Then
their guardians began to kill them one by one, making themselves beneficiary of their wills. That's the story of Killers of the Flower Moon of the 20s. About 200 Osage, up to 200 Osage were killed for their oil. But then we're making a second film. When I say we, George DiCaprio, and with his son's help and enthusiastic support, Leonardo DiCaprio, we are making the 100 years since Killers of the Flower Moon. That ends in the 20s. We're in the 2020s. And in that 100 years, we want to talk about the Osage in their own words. Want to tell you about the killers who followed the Killers of the Flower Moon. In particular, their name is Coke, Charlie Coke. Our film is simple. About half the film, and covering this 100 years since then, is the 40 years under Cokeocracy of the Osage Reservation. By this time, the Osage were stripped of their oil. They were poor. They were living in trailers. They didn't have much. They had these little stripper wells. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs allowed Coke Oil to go around and gather up their oil in trucks. And they would take 30 barrels of oil, the Coke Oil trucks, 30 barrels of oil and pay for 20.
How?
And it was, I don't want to oversimplify it, but let's put it this way. You pull up a truck in the middle of the night, as Chief Standing Bear tells us in our documentary. They pull up in the middle of the night and they say, it's an honor system. They would take oil out of the tanks, put it in their tanker trucks, send it back to Charlie Koch, and put in a little jar a piece of paper saying how much they took. I'm not kidding. Wow. It's like you go to the store and say, I think I got about $20 worth of groceries. See you later, and leave a little slip. No one's watching. And here's the thing. We have 50 drivers who say that Charlie Koch personally ordered this theft.
Really? Charles Koch is a multi-billionaire. He inherited, he was born a multi-millionaire. His father, built this big oil company. Why would he bother stealing, penny ante stuff from Native Americans? I don't get it.
In fact, we have a wired conversation in which Charles Koch, Charlie as everyone calls him, that Charlie Koch, when asked, hey, you're pretty rich. Why is taking like $10 a month from some poor Indian family? And his answer was, because I want my fair share. And that's all of it.
Seriously?
That is a quote. And not only do I have it on tape, but he used it another time. I can't say what organization it is, but a very major nonprofit. Charlie Koch the head of the organization called me, the chairman, and said, Charlie Koch used my organization, this major public charity, as a front for illegal campaign contributions. And when asked, why would you do this to this nonprofit organization? And Koch again said, because I want my fair share. And that's all of it. So you're going to get the full 40 years of massive theft, about $2.4 billion worth of oil. And then why Charlie Koch isn't in prison? You have to ask. You and I steal $10 from a gas station, we're in the can. So you take $2.4 billion of oil that's not yours. There was an indictment written up. There was a grand jury impaneled, and Charlie Koch was charged with the same thing as Donald Trump, racketeering, RICO. And he was also charged with theft from an Indian reservation. I'm not just talking about Koch oil. I'm talking about Charles Koch personally was about to be indicted. It never happens that a grand jury's impaneled, that the FBI writes up a draft indictment, and then it goes away. But what happened is that Koch, this is where the Koch political machine began. Their money machine began with Osage stolen oil, and their political machine began there. Because then Koch dumped tons of money into GOP coffers, and with Bob Dole's help, and with the help of
Bob Dole was then the senior Senate leader, right?
From Kansas, where Koch is based, out of Wichita. And what happened was they dumped in massive amount of money into the hands of Senator Don Nichols from Oklahoma. He replaced, it's up to the senators, he replaced the prosecutor, the federal prosecutor in the Koch case with one of his buddies, with one of Koch's buddies. The guy shut down the grand jury, quashed the indictment, and even did something no prosecutor ever does. He wrote Koch a letter saying, there's no evidence that you're stealing anything. It's like, no one gets that. And then this guy, this prosecutor who was brought in, did this one little act for Koch and his buddies, and was then made a federal judge. This is how the game works. And
he got rewarded.
Yep, he got rewarded. So even today, that hurts. You'll see this past week, I wrote an article for The Guardian about the documentary that I'm making with the DiCaprios. And as I say in The Guardian, it's still raw. I quote Everett Waller. Everett Waller is the chairman of the Tribes Resource Committee. Mm-hmm. And he is, by the way, you'll find out he went to college. He's an engineer. He knows this stuff. He told the Bureau of Indian Affairs, when you knew that Koch Oil was taking 3 barrels of oil and paying for just 2, why didn't you hang them right then? That was their responsibility, letting them steal billions from the poorest people in America. They went from the richest to the poor, and they're taking the last bits. And the BIA just stood there, which is why they are so angry today. They want this story told. And so we made a promise to the Osage that while Marty Scorsese's been very helpful on this too.
Yeah, is there any effort to claw back any of those ill-gotten gains from coke oil?
Yes. Well, one of the problems was that because the government threw out its case, coke oil paid pennies. Like they got something like $300 per family, I was being told many years ago. But then with the new leadership, there was an uprising in the tribe led by a journalist, Jim Gray, and his associate, now the principal chief Standing Bear. And they actually ran on a platform, get rid of coke and these thieves, and let's get some of our money back. They couldn't get it from coke, but they did successfully sue the U.S. government for failing its responsibilities as trustees. So they received a large check from you and me because our own Bureau of Indian Affairs was basically had its eyes closed. Was there corruption? I can't prove it. But they literally watched billions of dollars of oil being stolen. And so
over a 40 or 50 year period.
That's right. So the Osage want the rest of their story told. They also want you to understand why they want to bring it up 100 years is that they're not just victims. As former Chief Jim Gray told me, it was a wonderful film, Killers of the Flower Moon, telling basically our Holocaust story, our terrible story. But we didn't just end up as victims. We are warriors still trying to claim rights to our land and rights to our lives. The Osage are the only tribe I know of that actually purchased their own reservation territory. They just bought it from the Cherokee. And then it was turned to a reservation. So they were kind of conquered after they bought the land and lost control of it. They want control back of their land from the U.S. government, which switched from the deadly guardianship game where they were literally shooting Osage and individuals were getting the money. What you have now is this kind of guardianship, overlordship, and they call the chief agent of the BIA on their property is known as the Mahita, or the long knife, and that's where that comes from, the long knife that's still over their head. So they want some freedom, and ultimately, there's a lot of story and that we're going to tell in 40 minutes of 100 years of Osage life. But they're still up against the Kokes because what they want to do now is get out of the oil business and move to geothermal, but they don't have control of their land. And you have, if Donald Trump comes back in, now Joe Biden is the first guy to put in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and in charge of the Department of Interior. But if that ends, so there's at least some chance now of real serious reform and help for the Osage and basically liberation of their lives and land. But if that gets lost and it's back to oil company control of Department of Interior, and who's pushing this? We have to look at the climate science denial campaign of the Koch brothers. So you still have the Osage at the front lines confronting the Kochs. But you have to, this was where Koch oil's money and political machine the political Death Star started.
Originated. Amazing. You can see the trailer for it over at gregpalast.com, or the teaser for it, Long Knife, Osage Oil and the New Trail of Tears, the great Greg Palast. Greg, thanks so much for dropping by.
You're very welcome, Tom.
We will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I wanted to briefly say that you had an interesting conversation with a fellow named Lee earlier. And you had mentioned, we were talking about white supremacy. And I just wanted to posit that white supremacy and white privilege are two different things. And a lot of people get these things confused. White supremacy, for instance, is something that is more psychological. Anyone can be a white supremacist. I think you would agree that Clarence Thomas, Larry Elder, people like that, I think, are white supremacists. But they don't have white privilege, because white privilege is something that is more physical. Clarence Thomas could, not have his robe on and walk, down the streets of Compton in the middle of the night, and he would probably get treated like every other brother in Compton.
But he has wealth privilege, which is why he has to surround himself with the trappings of wealth in order to assert it.
Exactly, but you can't look at him and tell.
Right, unless unless you see him driving down the street in a Mercedes or something, yeah.
Of course. So I just wanted to kind of posit that, because one of the things that I think we constantly do when dealing with this very difficult issue in this country, the cancer of this country, is that we confuse these terms. And it was Socrates that said that the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. Prejudice and racism and white supremacy and white privilege, they're all different things. For instance, I'll be the first person to tell you I'm prejudiced against stupid people. Absolutely.
Yeah, welcome to the club. Yeah.
So that was it. I just kind of wanted to put that thought out there and get people to cogitate on, we have to make sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It is an important point to make. And certainly white privilege goes beyond the things that I listed, which are the things that, like I said, most white people don't think about, which is why it's so insidious and why it's so potent.
Absolutely.
But you can have, well, obviously, any white person has white privilege, whether they are asserting white supremacy or not. I guess the white privilege comes out of a society that broadly accepts white supremacy or accepts the underlying assumptions, because without those assumptions, you wouldn't have the privilege, right?
No, you wouldn't. Now, and I want to, not that I want to beat up on Clarence Thomas. Okay, I lied. I do want to beat up on Clarence Thomas. But like I said, take, for instance, and Clarence Thomas is a Supreme Court justice. Now, think about this. Clarence Thomas is in his own courtroom. And let's say he's a Superior Court judge in some municipality or state, whatever. And he's hearing criminal cases. And a guy that looks just like him, an identical twin, walks in, he's in his orange jumpsuit and the whole bit. Clarence Thomas is going to let that guy have it. You see, this is the difference. This is the difference in the two. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you did a really good job of it, and I appreciate it. It's an important distinction to draw, and all the subtleties of this thing are important to be bringing into these conversations. Kenyatta, thank you. It's always nice hearing from you. You always bring something to the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American Renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. Four minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. I had one quick Geeky Science story to share with you. We've all heard the stories about people who get organ transplants and suddenly their personalities change. Probably the most famous one was this 47-year-old woman here in the United States a couple of years ago who had never in her life drank or even had an interest in drinking beer or eating fried chicken. And she got a lung transplant from an 18-year-old and immediately developed a craving for beer and fried chicken. And it turned out when they went back to the family of the 18-year-old, those were his favorite foods, and he was kind of more or less addicted to beer and fried chicken. And so now they're thinking that it's not just organ transplants, that it includes blood transfusions. So a new study was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association of patients who'd received blood from donors who later had recurring hemorrhages. And what they found was that those people who got the blood from people who later on went on to develop hemorrhages, those people also went on to later develop hemorrhages, the people who received the transfusions. Now that might be from some chemical in the blood as opposed to a memory, but now they're some aberrant protein or something. But now Geneva University, a new study, reported how nearly half of the patients who got blood transfusions reported changes in their behaviors and their values after receiving those transfusions. Others say that their personality basically changed. One said he slept and dreamt a lot before. Another said he had a sense of taste that had been changed. He said, I hope the donor's blood is not taking over. A third patient reported that after the transfusion he felt happier and stronger. They're calling this cellular memory. There was a 2019 article in the journal Medical Hypotheses by Dr. Michael Leister, an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Colorado University, presenting the idea that, quote, memories from the donor's life are stored in the cells of the donated heart or organs or even blood and are then remembered by the recipient following a transplant. 5 years ago, they note, scientists reported they successfully transplanted memories from one snail to another just by transplanting parts of their tissues, not their brain, just body tissue. This had to do with snails who were trained to avoid a certain spot or they'd get shocks. That memory, that avoidance memory and that behavior transferred to the other snails who just got, infusions of some of the cells from the first snails, the cells that had nothing to do with their nervous system. Fascinating stuff. Okay, lots to talk about. I'll be picking up your calls on the other side of this break. It is 27 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truths the Trump humpers would really rather you didn't know. I'll be right back with your calls on the other side of this. Book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. You know, Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is, what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist. But we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmanReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, and picking up your calls here, Suzanne in Dublin, Ohio. Hey, Suzanne, what's on your mind today? Suzanne? Okay, here's what y'all need to do is keep your phone on, because there's no, you can't hear anything when you're on hold because of our phone system is screwed up right now. So keep your phone on speaker so that you can hear me, and you can leave it on speaker. You just put it up near your mouth when I put you on the air, and then listen carefully to. Anyhow, Suzanne, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Yes. So what's on your mind today?
Wonderful. I just wanted to add a couple comments about the ADHD and make a positive light on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, when I was very young, I don't know, maybe 20s or 30s, I had a personality profile test done, and it created a lot of anxiety because I was off the chart with creativity. Mm-hmm. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And then later in life, someone said, I think you have ADHD. And I'm not one to take drugs, and I don't trust Big Pharma because I think they push too much. I also heard that puts you on Adderall, which can be a form of cocaine. But I just wanted to say that creativity is often confused with ADHD. And I think, are you still there?
I am.
And I've been told, I've also been told that creativity, I learned to get over that fear of anxiety, that creativity is very much a gift. And if it wasn't for even Edison, who was an average student in school, I mean, so many creative people have contributed so many ideas and innovations to our society.
Yeah, Edison flunked out of second grade. His mother homeschooled him after that because the teacher said he was slow, which is incredible.
Yeah. So I think that, I think it's a negative, it's making creativity something negative and it's something positive.
I think that's brilliant, Suzanne. Richard Silberstein, Professor Richard Silberstein of Swinburne University in Australia, neuroscientist, he's been on this program a number of times. He's an old friend of mine. And he wrote a paper that was published in a peer-reviewed science journal, must be 2 years ago, 3 years ago, asserting that ADHD is associated specifically with creativity, that people with ADHD are more likely to have high levels of creativity than people without ADHD. And
they're the ideal people that change our society.
Exactly. And he identified the regions of the brain and the mechanism that is associated with it. It has to do with something called the default mode network. And it's a fascinating paper. In fact, I should get permission from him to see if I can get permission from him to republish it over at Hunters in a Farmer's World, or hunterinAfarmersWorld.com, because it's so good. All right.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I'm with you. Thank you, Susan. Suzanne,
Bye.
excuse me.
Bye.
Thank you. Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind today? Earl in Hyde Park, listening on Free Speech TV, watching on Free Speech TV. Again, there's a 9-second obscenity delay here, so that when I put you on the air, you won't know it if you're listening to your TV or your radio for 9 or 10 or 12 seconds. So I'm going to put Earl on hold here, and let's try Chip in Lawrence, Kansas. Hey, Chip, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. What's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call. A couple things before my main question. But first of all, when Greg was talking about Charles Koch, Do you know he goes out to restaurants, runs up hundreds and hundreds of dollars on his tab, and refuses to tip?
I have a hard time believing that.
No, they refuse. He's notoriously known for not wanting to tip because that's beneath him.
Well, you know, he's so wealthy, I'd be surprised if he goes to restaurants where the public can get close to him or near him. Well, who knows? Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
And as far as the cellular memory, that's a theory. People believe, there's a lot of people that believe that we inherit from our parents their memories up until the moment we were conceived. But, you know, their parents, it's called a subconscious universal. So, but okay, my main thing, my reason to call was, if we do go to war with China, could we say, hey, you guys started this crap? We are wiping out our debt to China. Could that wipe out what we owe them?
No. Well, first of all, I'm not sure that we have debt with China. You know, China has bought maybe somewhere between $1 and $2 trillion worth of treasuries, but anybody in the world can buy treasuries. They are IOUs, so, you know, theoretically there is a debt associated with that, you know, but it's not the kind of thing that you know, turns international politics. In terms of, you know, the probably $1 trillion a year in trade that we have with China, that is all, you know, company to company stuff. That's not government to government stuff, so it wouldn't show up that way.
Yeah, no, wishful thinking.
Yeah, okay. Chip, keep at it. Keep thinking.
Take care.
Okay, good talking to you. Andy in Hoosick Falls, New York. Hey, Andy, what's on? You wanted to talk about white privilege?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I wanted to just briefly share my experiences as a racist myself. Not wanting to be, but admitting so. I grew up in a very exclusively white suburban setting in the late 70s. And when I went to college in 1982, I was exposed to all different cultures and races, religion, sexuality. And the truth is that I thrived in it and I loved it. They were all my friends. But I was accused of being a racist at this one particular time. And I remember being incensed, like, what are you talking about? My roommate, he's black, and my other roommate, he's Jewish. They're all my friends. And when I found out years later, because I've heard this over and over and over and over again, and I started to see the pattern, and I identify myself now back in those days as what I would consider, I was what I would say was a macro racist. And I hear this in the right-wing circles, and I see this even in my job when there's nobody of any color. Just in the white locker room setting, I hear the same argument over and over again. I'm not a racist. My friends are all black. And I see that as what I call macro racism. And as I've gotten older, I like to say it's like I'm recovering. I'm a recovering racist, kind of like alcoholism. Like, you got to admit you got the disease.
Yeah, I think we all are.
But even today,
we're recovering from a racist society.
Right, and it is a disease. There's no question about it. And I say to myself that I grew up in this culture and I had the disease, so I see it at a macro level. But even today, I have to admit, there is a racism that's still what I would call micro racism. It's where I'm like in the checkout line and I see somebody of color in front of me, and I hear myself thinking in those terms still today. And it's more directed at the individual. So I have to still admit to myself, I'm a racist.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like to consider myself as somebody in recovery. Yeah. But it's still there. And it's like, if we don't admit to a certain degree our own white privilege, then we're not recovering from this illness. There's nothing wrong with admitting you're ill.
No, I get it. Excellent point, Andy. And you know, it's like with alcoholism, you know, acknowledging it is the first step. Andy, thank you. Good on you. Gar in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Gar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
You know, we're talking about enemies and war. The enemy is oppression, hate, and evil, and lies. That's the enemy of man. And in the Quran, it speaks about man plan, God plan, and God plan best. And it also speaking about do good, because God merciful to those who do good. And see, the thing about it is, we as a country has been in 75 wars. You've been at war 2 out of 3 years since World War II. And we would just come out of 20-year war in Afghanistan. And and the thing about it is they never talk about it. And I talked to you about it a few times. The most Americans killed in one day was during the Civil War.
Right.
In one battle, 25,000 Americans killed in 24 hours. In another battle, 25,000 Americans killed in 12 hours. The war, and what did Smedley Butler say? War is a racket.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's a racket.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we never look at how much one bomb costs. I was looking at one MX missile bomb costs $250,000.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
A Tomahawk cruise missile, $500,000.
Yeah.
A Daisy Cutter, $1 million.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we have inflation.
Yeah, there you go. Gar, excellent points all. Thank you very much. And thanks for listening to the program and calling in. It's 45 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Talk Media for the rest of us. Back with your calls in just a second. And welcome back. Scott in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Scott, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Thanks, Tom. I guess the advantage of keeping us in the dark.
Oh.
Hello?
That's
Hello?
strange. Yeah, hang on just a second, Rudy. I don't know how that happened. But suddenly, Scott just got thrown on the hold.
Alfalfa.
Okay, Scott, I'm sorry. You were somehow you got put on hold, so you're back on. So start over again.
Oh,
My
okay.
apologies.
No, that's fine. Remember the story out of Arizona where the Saudis were growing alfalfa and doing that stuff? Yeah. And when
Still
I first
are,
heard
actually.
that story, when I first heard that story, I thought of Greg Palast, and then hearing Greg today made me just want to go ahead and call because I think that they're using that alfalfa, the Saudis, as what I'll call a cover-up crop. To hide what their real goal is to just straight up steal water. And like Greg was talking about how they do the oil in the middle of the night on the, in the honor system kind of thing. I think that they're just pumping water, containing it up and putting it on planes and flying it back to Saudi Arabia with some alfalfa perhaps. But I think that the alfalfa is, like, say, a cover-up crop for just straight up stealing water.
I've never seen, I've not seen any evidence of that, Scott, and this is a story that's been fairly well covered, actually what they want is the alfalfa, that you've got the soil there in Arizona, and that it's rather poor, but it can grow alfalfa just fine if it's irrigated. So the water that they're taking is for the irrigation, and then, of course, there's some moisture in the alfalfa when it gets shipped to Saudi Arabia, but it's horse food. They've got these racehorses in Saudi Arabia, and they can't grow alfalfa there, except in greenhouses, which is very, only really economically works for fruits and vegetables.
Right, got it. That's probably it. But I thought of Greg, and I thought he should get on that and sit up there all night long and see what they're doing.
Yeah, he would be good at it. He would definitely be good at it.
He'd be the guy.
Okay, thanks a lot, Scott.
Thanks.
Good to hear from you. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I was just thinking about this world war situation, and I don't think it's going to come down to that. There was a gentleman that was talking about the populations in certain countries, and I think it's something to that. I think when it's all said and done, the two powerful countries like America and China, they're joined at the hip economically, and I don't think they're going to destroy that. But that being said, countries like Russia's in a very precarious situation. And I think for the most part, China's using them.
Yeah.
So, I just think that, yeah, you may come down to those small nukes, but once you start depopulation, meaning there are going to be a lot of people that's going to get
right. I think it's also important to remember that, Russia has an economy the size of Italy. I mean, economically, Russia is a fairly small country. And most of their economy is based on their ability to pump oil and natural gas, and a lot of coal. Yeah.
Yeah, and that being said, I had to ask myself, I wonder why Trump is allowed to go out and say the things he's saying, but Trump is going to be toast at the end of this because he's responsible for a lot of this.
I think so, too. I really think that, in fact, I'm beginning to get really skeptical that he's even going to be the Republican nominee. And if he is, he's going to get wiped out. Rudy, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. Kevin in Mason, Ohio. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio.
Kevin? Okay, you got to listen to your phone here, Kevin. I'll come back to you. Chris in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Chris, you're on the air. What's up? Okay, I'm going to put Chris on hold, and let's try Brandon in North Little Rock, Arkansas.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Brandon. What's up?
First of all, I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing on the hunters in a farmer's world. Really good stuff.
Oh, thank you.
On your website there, and
thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. I just wanted to just give my insights on it real quick. My youngest son has ADHD, and it's kind of, it's a little scary as a parent when you start, when your child's diagnosed that way. But the more we started researching it and figuring out what it was, me and my wife noticed, we had these same symptoms. And you start seeing that in yourself and other people that you know. And it is so incredibly enlightening because, or comforting. Yeah. Because, like I told my wife, I was like, look at us. We have a family, we have a house, we have careers, your life will be fine.
Yeah, the biggest problem with ADHD is that you're neurologically mismatched to modern day classrooms. I mean, that's the biggest challenge.
Exactly. And that's what, my wife has dove head first in this. She's a teacher, and she is all about divergent learning right now, these divergent takers.
Yeah.
And how do we address this? How do we serve these children?
Yeah.
And anyway, just wanted to say, that it's almost a blessing, because now I'm starting to see all this value in these divergent thinkers.
Oh,
and
I wouldn't be where I am
know,
today if it wasn't for my ADHD. Now, I might, you know, if I had been capable of sitting quietly in a classroom for hours and hours and doing academically brilliantly, I might have ended up, because I was a fairly smart kid, I might have ended up, you know, a doctor or something. God only knows. But I, you know, I'm not mourning any of that. I've made a pretty good life for myself. So, you know, bouncing around, as it were.
And I want other parents out there to understand that yes, there's so much value in it.
There's a gift, you know, here as well as a challenge, and that's why I put together this website, hunterandafarmersworld.com, you know, to tell people that. Brandon, thank you for the testimony. I appreciate your sharing your story with us. It's very kind of you. Kevin in Mason, Ohio. Hey, Kevin, let's try this again.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
I hear you now. Yeah, I'm ADD. I don't know which.
Welcome to the club.
To talk about. Yeah, I appreciate your new website, and there's a lot. Einstein couldn't speak until he was 4.
That's right.
You know, it's fascinating. About the October Surprise book, which I have the Barbara Honegger, but there's a Gary Sick also.
Yes.
He worked for Carter, and and he published in the New York Times in '91, telling his side of the story.
Yep.
About 3 months ago, a guy named Ben Barnes told his story. That's in the New York Times.
That's in the New York Times, yeah.
Fascinating, because he also spills the beans that he was the youngest Speaker of the House in Texas, and his task was to call the Air National Guard commander in Texas and get George Bush a slot
to avoid going to Vietnam. Yep.
Yeah. There's a movie called Truth that you haven't mentioned. I want to urge you. It's on Netflix, I believe. It's with Robert Redford plays Dan Rather. He got fired for running this story.
It was the story of George Bush getting out of his military service. Well, that's a good one. I didn't know that, Kevin. I'll have to check it out. Kevin, I'm sorry I'm out of time, but thanks for the information. I do appreciate it. Thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. There's so much to do, and only 13 months to do it. We got a huge election coming up. So we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. If I didn't, did I say tag you're it? I think I did. Well, if I didn't, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and Hartmann Report.